Welcome everyone to part 3 of Zirconium. This update feels overdue, but what you are seeing in this video represents over 2 months of work, and it's only a small part of what has gone into this build so far, and only one aspect. This build has the two opposites of modding, the old school handwork that I love so much, which I'm never going to give up, and also the future of modding, CAD, CNC machining, and we're going to the absolute extreme on both aspects. Myself and my engineer, me solely responsible for the handwork, and my engineer has been working on the CAD and the development, and we brainstorm the design together, and we brainstorm the ideas with the customer, who's actually visited us 3 times now from the other side of the world. It's been great to work so closely with the customer on a project like this, where we are just going absolutely all out. This is the first time that we've ever had no limitations whatsoever. And you can also see that it's the same thing with the components. So we're pretty much pursuing each idea to its absolute end, or the end of our capabilities. We're actually developing new technology for this build, which is going to go into some of our future products, and I can't even talk about that till the end of the build log for obvious reasons. But the handwork I've really been enjoying, as you can see, and what I'm working on right now is smoothing the frame. Even on the Inwind Tower 2.0, an $1,800 case, there is certain cost cutting that still needs to be done. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, I'm just saying that it's very expensive to make a case like this that is so creative. And the tempered glass, but in particular the frame, is very hard and very expensive to manufacture. And so one of the ways that they've helped to make it cheaper and cover up the imperfections is to use a very coarse sandblasting bead. And the frame has up to 3 millimeters of surface deviation, more so on the inside where it's more hidden, and it's not in the powder coat, it's in the metal. And I didn't just want to fill over this, because that's not going to be, the quality's not going to be great with a thick paint job, even though I'm using the best materials money can buy. I wanted to grind the metal flat. And so each side of the frame took about 12 hours straight of grinding. I did one side one day, one side the next day. And I had to take off so much material, about 4 millimeters all the way around, that the frame, I had to reshape the whole thing. So I'm using, grinding tools, and I can feel the frame is a lot lighter now. I really took off a lot of material. So I got it almost completely smooth, the metal, but there is still some surface deviation, nowhere near as bad, but certainly bad enough for the chrome to pick up. The chrome is just highly sensitive. It's very thin and reflective, so it picks up absolutely everything. Like one speck of dust and you can see it in the chrome. So this level of surface deviation, is just absolutely unacceptable. So this frame needs an enormous amount of work to get it absolutely perfectly smooth, like a mirror. And so what I've been doing, I started off using normal primer with a 24-hour dry time from DNA. But the dry time meant that it was just taking too long, because after 10 coats of primer, 10 days, I realized it was just going to take forever. Because each time I sand it all the way down, find the high spots and the low spots, and then a new coat. So I started using another product from DNA, a rub-through primer with a 1-hour dry time, so that I can move a lot more quickly. So that was the spray can that I was using there. We have another new addition to the build, which is the Phanteks Halos Lux digital RGB frame. We have 6 of these for the two 420mm radiators. And this is not so much for the RGB as it is for the beautiful CNC'd alloy component. Now the color scheme for this build is based on zirconium crystals, which are gold and blue. And for the gold, we are going to have 24 karat gold. We're going to be 24 karat gold plating quite a number of the components. We have M.2 heatsinks now from EK. We're going to be doing a mod for the 10 M.2s to cool them properly. And it actually involves the manifold and a wind tunnel. I'll get to that later. We also have the EK Monarch module adapters. Now, those two components are nickel plated already, so it's really easy to go over them with gold plating. They're already smooth and shiny. But alloy, particularly when it's anodized and sandblasted, you don't want that sandblasted finish with gold. It just doesn't look as good. We want the perfect gold mirror finish. And for that, I need to polish the alloy. And these were fairly smooth, but even still, you need to start at, I started at 400 grit with the sandpaper, and then you work your way all the way up to 2500 grit, and then you move on to some very fine grinding and polishing tools. Wet sanding. It took 2 hours per frame, 6 frames, so that's 12 hours just to get these polished. So we have two Black Ice Nemesis 420mm radiators, which is going to require another case mod to the front and top panels from 360, which is the stock on this case, to 420. We're going to do this with custom CNC components. This was an important mod to get that little bit of extra radiator capacity. The more the better, particularly for such high-end components, the 2990WX, two Titan RTXs. We're also liquid cooling the motherboard with a custom water block and we're liquid cooling 128 gigabytes of memory, which being memory, it's not a big deal, but it is still something to be considered. It's not that we don't have enough radiator capacity here, but obviously the more the better, and we could only fit a GTX on the front panel at the top of GTS, which is a 30mm thick radiator. Even though we're custom designing everything on the inside, the manifold, there was just not enough room. We still have to fit, the PSU and then the motherboard above it. And yeah, we just couldn't get that little bit of extra space for the thicker radiator. Another mod that I'm doing is to the Titan RTXs. We're going to be using the stock cooler and a water block. Now, we're not going to be using the fans. We're just using the stock cooler as a feature because it is such a beautiful component. I was actually quite surprised when I was dismantling the stock cooler how incredibly well made it is. I mean, this is one of those get what you paid for situations, being such an expensive GPU. But still, even all of the components that you can't even see are still made from metal. They're still gold plated. It really is a beautiful GPU and an amazing cooler. And I'm glad that we're doing something unique, instead of just installing another water block on another GPU. And you're going to be able to see the coolant still, the water block, through the fan holes from the sides. And because the GPUs are going to be recessed to some extent into the manifold, I think it's going to work really nicely. But it was a difficult mod. I had to cut up the water block and cut up some of the original mounting system. This is yet another new addition and another mod. And yes, there are still mods that I haven't mentioned for this build. So as I mentioned, we are cooling the M.2s with EK M.2 heat sinks, which are going to be 24 karat gold plated. And I'm doing a mod so that the PCBs will be covered. I'm going to be removing the fans, but I'll come back to this in the next part of the build log because it's going to be quite an involved mod. I know I'm not finishing any mods in this video, and that's just due to the way the timelines worked out. The mods are very time consuming. There's different suppliers involved. For example, these heat sinks need to go off to be gold plated. And actually, probably in the next part of the build log, I'm going to be more focusing on the manifold, the CAD, and the machining. And then when I come back in the part after that, all of the mods will kind of be finished around the same time.